Our story begins on a small estate outside London. A poor teenage girl named Molly Walsh was a milkmaid to the lord of the land. She had to milk the cow twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. The cook yelled at her when she came back to the kitchen without any milk, saying that she had stolen the milk and would have to be arrested. So Molly was taken away for something she didn't do. From the horrid prison, Molly was taken to court for trial. She faced a jury made up of wealthy men who showed no mercy for poor servants like herself. In England back then, the penalties for stealing were very harsh, long terms of imprisonment or even death.
John 3:16. For God loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
Molly Walsh, the jury has found you guilty of stealing your master's property. Your sentence would be execution by hanging, except that you are a Christian and can read the Bible, and therefore it is unlawful to kill you. I therefore sentence you to
Molly
7
was
years.
sentenced to serve as an indentured servant for 7 years in the New World. She prepared for a long journey on a convict ship to the American colonies. Molly was taken from the prison and was shoved onto a ship with a lot of other convicts. They were all to cross the Atlantic to become indentured servants, forced to work for 7 years for masters in a strange land. On the ship, she was seasick and tired. It was a nightmare below the decks. After several months, Molly saw mountains and land and felt fear and wonder. Later that night, she was off the ship and had stepped onto the eastern shore of Maryland. Once Molly got off the ship, she was auctioned off to a planter in the colony of Maryland. As an indentured servant, she had to work for 7 years for her master. During the servitude, Molly would not get paid and would have to work very hard. At the end of her servitude, she would receive benefits such as clothing, food, a gun, and 1 wagon.
Molly, go work in the fields and pick tobacco.
It's too hard. I'm not strong enough for this.
Molly, this is your last day of work. Do it right.
I'll work for 7 years. I am ready, and I'm not going to back down from my destiny.
Molly was now free. She loaded her supplies, a suit of clothes, a bag of seeds, food, tools, and a gun into the wagon and headed west toward new adventures. Molly drove her wagon west until there were fewer and fewer roads. When she found a place in the wilderness with no more houses, she claimed some land for herself. Molly built her house and started her farm. She sometimes had help from her neighbors, building her house and harvesting crops, but it wasn't enough.
I need to harvest my tobacco plants. I'll ask my neighbors to help me.
It was too much work for one person. Her farm was doing well, but she needed help. She saw an advertisement for a slave auction and decided to purchase a slave. Molly traveled back into town and found her way to the wharves where the slave auctions took place. There were a lot of people milling around, watching the slaves being led to the auction block. The slaves had heavy chains on their hands and feet. They looked angry and sad. Molly saw a tall and proud, dignified man. She looked into his eyes and wanted to buy him right away.
Am I to bid 400 pounds of tobacco for the slave?
400.
450.
500.
Going. Sold for 500 to the lady.
Molly bought the slave and took him home. His name was Bannaky. She found out that Bannaky was good company. He knew a lot about irrigation and plants. He was sick a lot because of what had happened on the slave ship, but he got stronger and stronger. They began to have more feelings for each other. Molly didn't think of Bannaky as a slave, but a friend. Bannaky didn't think of Molly as a slave owner, but a friend. After Molly and Bannaky had lived together and Bannaky had learned her language, Molly and Bannaky became very fond of each other. Very, very fond of each other. After quite some time, they decided to take the final step. They had fallen in love and decided to marry. This marriage was going to be lovely. It was going to be wonderful. It was going to be a connection between two people full of love and compassion. This was going to be the marriage of a lifetime.
Do you, Molly Walsh, take Bannaky to be your lawfully wedded husband?
This marriage was all it was put up to be. They had exchanged roses, which symbolized the connection they had reached. At the time, it was outlawed for European people to marry African people. But Molly and Bannaky did not care. They didn't let the law stand in their way, for this was the marriage of a lifetime. They were ready to start a family, but this was not going to be a regular family. No, it was going to be a wonderful family, full of love and compassion. Molly and Bannaky had 4 girls. They all helped around the house. Their family had lots of good times. Crops were growing. Molly and Bannaky were in love. Everything was good. Until...
I'm going to gather some firewood.
It's raining out. You could get hurt.
I'll be okay.
Bye,
A
Daddy.
couple of hours went by, and Bannaky hadn't come back. Molly began to get worried. Later that night, a neighbor came with terrible news. He had found Bannaky's body under a tree. The tree was hit by lightning. Everybody was very sad. A day later, they had a funeral. Bannaky's death made their hearts ache with sadness. Their eyes were puffy like clouds, and their heads ached from crying. That night, they all sat by the grave with tears in their eyes. The man Molly loved was dead. Molly's children had lost their hero, their role model, their father.
Time to go, children.
But, Mama, we love Daddy.
Daddy, please come back.
Mama, is he coming back?
After Bannaky's death, life was more difficult, but the family kept going, working together to farm the land. Bannaky was gone, but his spirit came through his children. The daughters grew up into women, and they also fell in love and married African men who had been enslaved. One daughter married and then freed a slave named Robert from Guinea in Africa. They had a child. Over the years, Benjamin became a curious young boy. Molly realized that Benjamin would soon be a grown man and go out into the big world. He would need an education. Molly decided he must learn to read.
For John was not yet cast into prison. Here, now you try.
For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
Good. Never forget that.
Benjamin learned faster than Molly thought possible. Soon he became interested in learning beyond what Molly could teach him. He wanted to learn what lay beyond the earth itself.
Benjamin Banneker grew up to be an author, scientist, mathematician, farmer, astronomer, designer, publisher, and urban planner. At age 22, he built a clock whose parts were made almost entirely from wood. The clock kept time for the rest of his life. His study of mathematics and astronomy led to his prediction of a solar eclipse. In 1791, he assisted in serving what would become the new capital city of Washington, D.C. He published his own almanacs, which included astronomical tables as well as poetry and anti-slavery essays. He wrote a famous letter to Thomas Jefferson challenging Jefferson's views on race. In his old age, he continued farming, growing fruit trees, keeping bees, and playing his violin. He died in 1806. On the day he was buried, his little house burned, destroying all of his work and his fine wooden clock.